For the purpose of this class, we're going to think about we're going to think about all of this together. Genesis through 2 Kings, so the Pentateuch and the Deuteronomistic history, as a theological history. It's all moving towards some end. And so you're going to notice as we turn to Joshua that there are theological themes that maybe don't make a whole ton of sense when it comes to the way that people usually wage war or try to take over countries or anything like that. But keep in mind that this is a theological text, that it's telling us something about God and the way that God works rather than necessarily trying to communicate something historical. All right, so we've got our theological text that Hermione is weaving for us, that our Deuteronomist is writing. And one of the first things that you're going to encounter in Joshua, when Joshua and Joshua's army go into the land of Canaan to take it over, they are going to they're going to enact acts of holy war, which means that I didn't realize that it would skip like that. Okay. Well, Okay, so Joshua is all about holy war. The way that war is done is very different, and there are reasons for that. It's because the space that Joshua is going to take over, the land of Canaan, all of it is sacred space. Now, before, when we talked about sacred space, we limited it to just the tabernacle. That was where Yahweh was dwelling, and then that sacred space kind of leaked out and got to the camp, so that if you're going to live with Yahweh at your center, you're going to have to be very, very pure. In the book of Joshua, we find out that sacred space was present in Eden, certainly. And that's why the tabernacle looks a whole lot like Eden. And in Genesis 2:10 through 15, we hear about the marking out of Eden as sacred space, where Yahweh is going to dwell. And then when we read in Exodus 25 about the tabernacle, we also thought of that as sacred space. Any place where Yahweh dwells is sacred space. And now when we turn to Joshua 1:4, we find out that it is being marked out as sacred space as well. So this whole land, the entire land of Canaan, has become sacred space where Yahweh is going to dwell. So no longer are they moving along or moving around in the wilderness, but they've gone to the place where they belong. They've gotten to the place where Yahweh is going to dwell. And so the whole land of Canaan is sacred space. So how do we know that we're dealing with sacred space and holy war here? Well, there are a couple of things. So when you're fighting a regular battle, it doesn't really matter whether the soldiers are circumcised or not. Like, being circumcised doesn't make you a better fighter. But in Joshua, we find out that in order to fight in the battles, all of the men have to be circumcised. Similarly, when you're fighting a regular battle, the chaplains are not on the front line. They don't go into battle first. But in Joshua, we find out that the priests go into battle first. Then, in normal battle, you don't really do ritualistic practices. So, for example, you don't march around cities that you want to take over a certain number of times. You don't have to offer a sacrifice for things to go really well. And so all of those things are things that point us in the direction of this is a different kind of war. So Joshua is going to wage war on the people who are currently living in Canaan. And he's going to do it in a really specific way that indicates to us that this is holy war. This is a war that is meant to sanctify or purify the land. And the key way that we know that Joshua is about holy war is because he's instructed by Yahweh when he goes into a city to devote every living thing to the ban. Now, what is the ban? The ban just means that you kill every living thing in a given city and then you burn it up. So the thought process was that, I wonder if I should draw this or not, was that in order to sanctify this piece of land, Canaan, all of the mundane and all of the things that move towards death needed to be taken away, needed to be completely burned up. And so when Joshua enters the land of Canaan with all of his soldiers, if Yahweh is going to dwell there, they're going to have to either drive out or completely destroy any of the living things that are currently there. So all of the people in the cities, every man, woman, and child, all of the animals as well, all of it needs to be committed to the ban. And that the ban is just an Old Testament phrase that means killing everything and setting it all on fire. It's kind of difficult for us to understand in our modern context because that's considered genocide and a war crime. It was really pretty common in the ancient Near East to wage war in this way. I don't know if that makes it better, but it was common. So in Joshua, what we find out, here is just a little blurb on the ban. In Deuteronomy 20, which we know the Deuteronomistic historian is holding on to really tightly and is like, Deuteronomy, I love you. In Deuteronomy, Yahweh instructs the people, you need to utterly destroy them, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, as Yahweh, your God, has commanded you. So when you enter into the land, you have to destroy all of these people. And like I mentioned before, this is a difficult thing, especially for modern readers, because it sounds really harsh, and it kind of is. And I think that it's right that we are kind of shaken by this, especially because in the Quran, there's something very similar. And it's passages like this one, when we decide to destroy a town from the Quran. We command those corrupted by wealth to reform, but if they persist in their disobedience, our sentence is passed and we destroy them utterly, right? And this is the kind of passage that folks in ISIS will point to, or radical Islamist groups will point to passages like this to say, listen, when we go into a place and we take it over, we have to kill everyone there if they don't convert and do what we want them to do. So there's similar thought process there. And I want us to be aware of that this is in our Bible. So this idea of killing every man, woman, and child and all of the animals is present in your Bible. And that's something that maybe, as a Christian, if you are one, you might want to come to terms with. This is a very difficult topic, which is why I have assigned to you the reading that I assigned to you, the Davis reading, and hopefully you'll do that and you'll do the exercise that goes along with it to kind of try to process some of this. But the way that I am presenting this to you is as holy war, same way that it's presented in the Quran, as holy war. You sanctify a place so that God can dwell there. This is in your Bible as well. So the people of God go into Canaan and they have to sanctify it, make it holy so that God can dwell there. Now, there are two case studies that I want us to look at. The first is, and I've put this clip for you onto Blackboard so that you can watch it in your own time, but the very first example is Jericho. When the people of God go into Jericho to take it over, everything goes according to plan. They follow the rules of holy war and things go well. However, in the very next chapter, the people of God go to Ai, and that's the next city over. There's the name of it, Ai. And one of the people within the camp, his name is Achan, he doesn't follow the rules, and he tries to keep some of the spoils of war for himself instead of dedicating it all to God. And so, as it turns out, Achan and his whole family have to be stoned to rid the evil from among the people of God. So those are the two conflicting case studies. You can certainly watch the VeggieTales recounting of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. It is an excellent example of priests going into battle, ritualistic practices, committing everything to the ban. When they go into Jericho, they destroy everyone, except for one woman, a prostitute named Rahab, who has helped the Israelites in their task. So these are your two case studies for what's going to happen within Holy War. Now, by the time we get to the end of Joshua, Joshua has gone into the land with these forces, and they have taken over the whole thing. And this is really exciting. So that's why I have exclamation points here. The people of God have gone into the land of Canaan, and they have won, and they have committed everything to the ban, and they have purified the place. And look, there it is. And they have taken over this whole region, and they've settled there. We've got all of the 12 tribes represented. They're all settled in the land, and this is good. This is an answer to the promise to Abraham that God had promised, hey, you're going to get to go into the land at some point. So the way that Joshua ends is kind of on a high note. And if the whole Old Testament ended there, then we would be fine. We would have the covenant with Abraham under control. But we also need to ask, well, what actually happened? So this is the way that the story is told. But can we be sure that a guy named Joshua actually led a ragtag group of soldiers through all of Canaan, and they burned it all up and took it all over? Well, what actually happened, we don't really know how the Israelites actually came into Canaan, just like we don't really know what happened with the Exodus. But there are a couple of different ideas. So number one, maybe there was a military conquest. Maybe a group of people who called themselves Hebrews or Israelites did come into Canaan and kill a bunch of folks. These are all in Bandstra too. So if you need to refresh your memory on these different models, then you can certainly do that. Another idea is that a people group who worshiped Yahweh migrated peacefully and didn't actually use military conquest to come into Canaan, and those people later became known as the Israelites. Another option is that there was an internal revolt. So people who were already living in Canaan said, we're sick of all of this, rule by other people, and we want to rule ourselves, and we want to worship Yahweh. And so there, folks that were already living there that didn't start out somewhere else decided to throw off the shackles of whoever was in charge of them. And then the final one, and this is the reading that I gave you from Davis that you're doing those response questions with. Davis looks at Joshua as resistance literature. She says that Joshua was written around the same time as Deuteronomy, and that during this time, the people of God, the Israelites, were being ruled by the Assyrians, just like with Deuteronomy, and that Joshua is resistance literature in which people who are oppressed by one of those big cat civilizations like Assyria write literature in which they describe what they would do if they could. And so they're resisting the leadership of the Assyrians. They don't want them anymore because it's an oppressive regime. And so they write literature making believe what they would do to the Assyrians if they possibly could. And so they write Joshua to be like, we could overthrow them, or if we could overthrow them, we would, and we would love to do that. So read through Davis, see what you think of that. And then your final question for discussion here, which is also in your exercises just below, is how can Christians deal with these texts? What do we need to do as Christians? And there are a couple of different options. One, you could say, well, if the stuff in Joshua didn't really happen, and they didn't actually commit every man, woman, and child to the ban, then maybe it's okay. Or you could say, well, even if it didn't happen, this is still in my sacred text, and it seems to legitimize going in and killing a whole bunch of people, committing genocide, and that's not okay. And so just to kind of be upfront with you about where I am on all of this, I don't really know what to do with the stories in Joshua, and I don't know what to do with the ban, and I don't like it, and I think that it is really counter to what Jesus does on the cross, where when others deserve to be killed, Jesus said, I would rather be killed on their behalf. So in a way, when we get to the New Testament, we find that in order to purify everything, Jesus becomes the ban, which is different from in order to purify everything, everyone else becomes the ban. So I'll leave you with that. I'm sorry we're ending on kind of a Debbie Downer note, but the ban is tough. And so it makes sense for Christians to wrestle with it and ask questions about it, because this is a really dark part of our Bible. So I hope that you will wrestle with it, and maybe you will come to some better conclusions than I have come to. I hope. And if you do, please share them with me.